hello everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining this, our very first session of the APECS YESS YOPP Early Career Workshop on Polar Prediction and Collaboration in the Arctic. APECS and YESS are early career organizations that support researchers in polar and earth sciences respectively. And YOPP is the flagship activity of the Polar Prediction Project. And a key part of YOPP, which you will hear a lot more about during the coming sessions, is about engaging with the early career community. I really encourage you all to attend our second session at 4 p.m. GMT today to find out more about each of the three organizations and how you can get involved in their activities. So we're kicking off today with our session, Home Office Fatigue and Zoom Networking. And the aim of this session is to explore how COVID-19 has affected researchers and ECRs in particular. We're going to hear from 5 different speakers about a variety of surveys that were carried out over the course of the last year to better understand the impact of the pandemic on academia. I'm going to give you a brief opportunity to ask questions to each speaker after they've spoken, but then we'll finish up with a panel discussion where we can go into a bit more of a detailed conversation with all of the speakers. Before I invite our first speaker, we have a few Mentimeter questions that we'd invite you to answer. Dennis, who's helping me to organize the session from APECS, is going to add a link in the chat. And if you could just click on the link and answer any questions that come up. We're going to have 3 sets of questions throughout the session. So one set now, which is mostly some demographic questions. The questions are all anonymous, but we will collect the demographics. We'll have a couple of speakers talk, and then we will have another set of questions, and then we'll finish off with the last 3 speakers and have another set of questions. So while you're all accessing the survey, I'd just like to do a bit of housekeeping. So please be aware that the session is being recorded on video. If you don't want to appear on the video, then just make sure that you have your camera off. We're going to make the recording available through APECS so that any early career researchers who weren't able to attend this session can benefit from the presentations and the discussions. I'll ask you all please to mute your microphone at all times unless invited to unmute. If you do get asked to unmute and ask a question, it would be great if you could turn your camera on when you're speaking, just to help get to know each other a bit better. Please use the chat to put any questions you have to the speakers. Dennis and I are going to be following the chat, and we'll incorporate your questions into the discussion. It's great to know who we're speaking with, so please make sure you've got your name shown in Zoom so that we know who you are. So hopefully you're all clicking away on the Mentimeter survey. And if I could then ask Dennis now to share her screen to start looking at what results are coming through.
So this is the result of our first survey. And according to age range, it's quite nice as well. We had a great number of postdocs with us. And finally, this is, yeah.
A surprising number of people from Europe, considering the hour of the meeting.
That's all right.
Thank you all of the Europeans for attending.
This is all from the first poll. Thank you for joining.
Thanks very much. So now I'm going to ask our first speaker to join to start showing their slides. So we're first going to hear from Kirsten Werner from the Alfred Wegener Institute in Bremerhaven. And Kirsten is going to present the results of the Year of Polar Prediction survey that aim to find out the impacts of the polar prediction community working within the field of weather and forecasting. And this is one of the first surveys that was submitted right at the beginning. I think it was in July this one went out, so when the pandemic was still something new. I'll hand over to you, Kirsten.
Yes, good morning everyone from Bremen, and welcome to this joint APECS YOPP YESS session. I'm really happy that we could organize these 3 different sessions. So we start off with a rather small survey amongst the polar prediction community. And this was, as Claire said, done in July, so rather early in during the pandemic. So for those of you who don't know what the Polar Prediction Project is, I would recommend you also going to session 2 and session 3 today and tomorrow. But just very briefly, so the Polar Prediction Project has been initiated by the World Meteorological Organization's World Weather Research Project to improve mainly, so the main goal was to improve weather and sea ice predictions in the Arctic and Antarctic, where you don't have a lot of observations still, and these are needed in order to make better forecasts. And the Year of Polar Prediction was a 2-year initiative actually to improve observations in the Arctic and Antarctic, and it's so-called the flagship activity of the Polar Prediction Project. And for this Year of Polar Prediction, or the PPP, Polar Prediction Project, we have a well-connected international science community right now in polar prediction research. And the motivation for the survey was actually mainly curiosity. I was last year in summer, I was putting together the next Polar Predict News. This is our newsletter. You can go on this webpage here, Polar Prediction Net, and you'll find it. And I was wondering about, it was May, June, I was thinking, okay, there are a lot of impacts in terms of observations, the planes didn't go, and they would always have on a routine basis these atmospheric observations. So this was a huge discussion by the time, also by the World Meteorological Organization, how to balance these lacking data. And then I was also wondering what actually about our colleagues and our community. And I wanted to write this overview article in Polar Predict News. You can find that also in issue 15. And wanted to know more about concerns and also expectations of our community impacted by COVID-19 in terms of weather and sea ice forecasts in polar regions. And so what did we do? We opened a Google Form survey from 6th to 24th of July last year. We had a mix of check boxes, multiple choice, and open-ended questions. And as I said, it's a rather small survey, so we had 47 responses in total. Who were our respondents? So most of them were researchers, but we also had some forecasters, which are part of our community. Most of them were senior and on a permanent level, but some early and mid-career levels as well. Most of them worked in the Arctic, but we had Antarctic people who work in the Antarctic and also working at both poles. And most of them were male, 70%, female, 30%. We asked for the impact of COVID-19 in general. So the question was, the pandemic so far has impacted my daily operations, life, the research I'm involved with in the Antarctic or Antarctica. And as you can see here, for most of the people, there was at least some impact. Yes, very much, 36%, to some extent, more than 50%. And then we also had an open-ended questions, what actually was the impact you felt so far? And we clustered this a little bit. So you can see there were a lot of canceled fieldwork activities, meetings and workshops wouldn't go on. And so network opportunities were decreased. And of course, the entire working structure with moving to home office was changing. We also asked in that relation about the time for working, because there was a discussion, finally people have some time to work on their scientific results and publish paper. So the COVID-19 situation has given me more time to work on scientific results. And for many of them, the situation hasn't changed at all, 43%. But there are people who said, no, I now have less time to carry out my research due to other duties, including childcare and so on. There were also some who said, yes, I finally find the time to analyze and publish my work. We also looked at the fraction of females only, and I think that's interesting, and we might go into a discussion later a bit more. So there 50% said, no, I now have less time to really carry out my research. While there is quite a bunch of also female participants who said, yeah, no, everything is fine, nothing has changed. We wanted to know more about what people expected in terms of the quality of weather and sea ice forecasts. So we asked, will the national lockdowns impact the quality of weather and sea ice forecasts in my area of research and operations? And there was a big uncertainty. So last July, nobody knew what actually happened. And many people said, yeah, I just don't know. But there were also some who said, yeah, no, I don't think so. And there was a bunch of people who said, yes, they will. Again, we had an open-ended questions here with that question. What do you expect will be the main fallback caused by the pandemic when it comes to weather and sea ice forecasting? And we clustered these again, and we found that there were big concerns about the data collection because of the lack of maintenance work actually at the stations. You know, you have these instruments there and they need to be repaired on a regular basis. And if you have some field seasons just not happening, then of course this is an issue. And also in general, the decrease in field activities to not going out in the field and get your data. And then there were also concerns about less future funding of polar programs, for example. We asked people about the next field season. Would they expect any impact on research and operations in particular in the next field season? So there was a clear statement, yes, very much. Some of them said, yeah, probably a little, but 9% even thought, yeah, I don't think so. And we also asked them about the future. And here you can see there's less uncertainty. Maybe answered a lot of people, but then there were also people who said, many people said, yes, there will be future issues in terms of weather and sea ice forecast operations. So the major concerns summarized were from this community that there would be gaps in observations and data collection due to the cancelled fieldwork and the maintenance. There would be future funding opportunities would be endangered because there might be less money available for polar programs. And there would be limited network opportunities as well. And this has, of course, quite some impact in particular for the early career researchers, because they have their particular time period when they have to, for example, finish up their PhD projects, and so they can't just postpone things. But there were also in the survey some statements about new opportunities, and I just wanted to bring this up here at the end to also, have some positive prospects. So one person said, yeah, there's also a new way of networking that might even be an advantage with the new collaborations between far apart colleagues being established and online conferences being much more accessible to everyone. So I think we're doing right now this kind of activity, which is in a way nice to really reach out to people. Then there was a statement about the reduced carbon footprint of our research community, which is also a positive aspect. And I have to admit, I mean, traveling within academia is quite a thing, or has been. And now with us not traveling, we see that things go on in a slightly kind of different way. But yeah, this might be a positive consequence. Also, one person said, yeah, there will be less expeditions, but this means also more focus on the data analysis and extracting insights from the existing data sets. And also a person stated, we might have the chance that more robust operational systems will be built in the future, and also that the local science communities will support each other's more. And yeah, if you want to know more about this, I would highly recommend you go to Polar Predict News issue 15 and read this article. This year is difficult to predict. There's also something about the Mosaic expedition that actually went on, even though. And also we are having a short report, yeah, work in progress. We will finalize that some point soon and then also publish this on the Polar Prediction website. And with this, I thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. If anyone has a question, I'd like to pop it in the box, then please go ahead. Or if you want to raise your hand, we can unmute you to ask a question. If I can find the participant list. While we're just waiting to see if anyone wants to put something in the message box, perhaps I'll ask something, Kirsten. Has Europol prediction come up with anything to address some of the outcomes that came from the report, or is there still something that's being considered?
We are still working on this report, I have to say. I'm a little bit tending, I would like to repeat the survey, actually. I'm not sure about this, but it would be interesting now, almost a year after, to see if people still have the same impression or if something changed. But we haven't had any consequences based on this report, other than, you know, moving even more online. We had our meetings already online, because this is a very international project with many people connecting from different regions of the world. And now, of course, everything is online as for everybody. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. So I think we'd like to move on to our next speaker. So Cara, if you would like to share your screen. Oh, sorry, Valentina. Valentina, if you'd like to share your screen. So I'd like to welcome Valentina Rabanal from YESS, which is the Early Career Community, Earth Sciences community. I'm especially grateful for Valentina being able to speak here in person, because she's calling in from Buenos Aires, where I think it's 2 a.m. So thank you very much. Valentina is part of the YESS community, and they did a really big survey on early career impacts of the pandemic for early career researchers working in earth sciences. So over to you, Valentina.
Thank you, Claire. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. Depends on the part of the world you are. I'm Valentina. I'm the YESS officer, and I will talk you about the survey we developed last year. First, a little bit about YESS. I will talk about more in the next session, but just a little bit. YESS has a YESS community with more than 1,800 members from all over the world. We have a council with 32 members nowadays. This is a group of one of the most active members. Some of these members also work in different working groups, which every working group has their own activities, but we all work together for the YESS activities. We also have an executive committee and a group of regional representatives who are elected every year. Now we are in the process of the election, and next week, the last days of March, we will have the results. The executive committee that you are now seeing here in the picture will change a little bit. And we also have a YESS international office, which is located in the Argentinian Med Service in Buenos Aires City in Argentina. This is a little bit how we divide the world. We have 7 regions, and as I mentioned, we have regional representatives for each region, 2 per each one of these. So it's a total of 14. And I show you this because now in the survey we are using the same regions to explain where our responses came from. During the COVID-19 crisis, mostly during the first months where there was a lot of uncertainty in the world, we developed different activities using our potential. YESS has been since 2010 a fully virtual network. So we use all the resources we have. We already had a Zoom account since 2018. We have a website with different groups inside. So we use everything we had to support our early career researchers. Like, for example, we had a Twitter poster week where we shared the recent posters of our members. We also had virtual coffee breaks 3 times a week during, I think, 2 months, where we open a Zoom room where everyone can join to talk about anything. There was no topic. You can, if you were alone, you can join to have a coffee or eat also during this meeting. We create in our website a special space for gather all the online resources we found that can be useful for early career researchers. And we also develop a survey to gather the experiences of the early career researchers during the first 2 months of the first 2-3 months of the pandemic. The survey was launched in April, and we closed it in June. And during this period, we had 197 responses from all over the world, from bachelor students to junior professors. And the idea was to understand how the young scientists from Earth System Sciences were coping with this particular situation that we are still living. And we divided the questions in three categories: personal, professional, and then a third category, which was non-mandatory, which we ask about their challenges, the tools, and the skills they use or they learn during this period. This is the questions we include. Some questions about the personal aspects, others about the professional, which was the biggest category, and then the challenges, tools, and skills. Regarding the report, most of the participants were students, master, bachelors, or even PhD students. And also we had a big number of postdocs. The numbers of professors or another category were smaller, and most of the responses came from people working at universities or at non-university research institutes. As you can see in the map, we have responses from all over the world, but mainly came from Europe. More than half of the responses came from there, but we also have a big community in Africa. So in Africa and South America, were also represented. Southeast Asia as well, even though we have way more members than the number that we received. And North America, Central Asia, and Southwest Pacific, which is Oceania, were really few the responses we received from these regions. As Kirsten just mentioned, we had some similar numbers. For example, in the case of the question, in what extent the pandemic has been affecting you, around 96% of the responses were that at least somehow their work has been affected. Only 7 responses out of 197 say that their job hasn't been affected at all. So the number, we were expecting these numbers, but I think we didn't knew that the number were really high until we start analyzing the results. This was a little shocking. And then analyzing in each category of these ones, at least 36% of the people say that their job has been mostly or totally affected. And then 39% say that at least somehow their work has been affected, which is also a huge number. Regarding the questions about the challenges, these questions were optional, so the total is smaller. The sample that we had 162 responses here. It was a lot, and this part was difficult to analyze because there were open questions. So we need to, after we receive the results, we discuss a lot how to categorize this information. And at least 69%, 69 people say that their biggest challenges were related with personal aspects. We have we receive responses from concentration to uncertainty about their future job, their future, the future of their careers. A lot of people also were struggling with having to work far away from their houses, far away from their offices, I'm sorry. And this also affects their motivation. They also found issues with their productivity. We found these challenges a lot, and these were one of the most recurrent challenges we found. And also 28 participants say that they were having problems with their work plan. For example, some of them didn't have interaction with their colleagues for a long time. So this affects the plan they prepare before the lockdown. Also time management, because working from home changed a little bit how you cope with all the things in the same place. Also the council field work for people that their work depend on this part, also were a little worried about this, and this was between April and June. So I think a lot of field work was canceled after that. So maybe the numbers can be totally different now if we launch a second survey. What we also include in the report was a list of recommendations. These recommendations were made for early career researchers, but can be extended in some way to all the scientists. We create this list based on the lessons that we found the members learned, or the activities they try to engage with to cope with their challenges. And some of the recommendations we include in the list. This is only a brief summary in the link that I will give you in the chat. You can find all the information about these recommendations. But we recommend to foster supportive communities, to increase the online engagement. Some people were alone during this time, so we found that the online engagement was really important to work with someone, or to also to not feel alone all the time. For example, I think most of the people that prepared the, I think, yeah, at least the 5 authors of this report, 3 of them were living alone. So when we have the meetings, it was like one of the moments in the day that you interact with people. Also, we found that a lot of people were having problems with internet connections, or not having all the accesses for the institutional resources that maybe they have in their own offices. So guarantee this kind of resources are really important to develop and to be able to have your job as the most realistic way, even though you are not in the office. Also, we recommend that different online opportunities can be created for early career researchers. Also promote internships and fellowships that doesn't need to be in one place, but you can do it remotely. And last but not less important, we think that some tasks and schedules should be more flexible, because we also found that a lot of people were facing problems trying to manage motherhood or fatherhood, the kids in their houses, working in the same place. So I think we found that this can be something that the institutes or also the same colleagues can try to adapt in their workspace. And here you can find in this QR code, you can find the report. This is the list of authors. The authors are living in four different countries. So we managed to develop this with, I think, 5-6 online meetings, working from different parts, because Leandro and me are in Argentina, Johan is in United States, George is in Mali, and Sabiashi is in India. So we developed this report fully online, and we only interact virtually. So we use some of the recommendations we include in the report for preparing this. So this is our social media. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Valentina. Does anyone have any questions for Valentina they'd like to pop into the chat? If not, I might go ahead and just ask if some of the measures that YESS put in to help support early career researchers, was that in response to the survey, or did you put those, or was that independent of the survey?
You mean the list of activities we developed?
Yeah,
no,
the coffee mornings. Yeah.
Oh, no, it was, I think in March, where in April we have, YESS has a monthly meeting with the most active members. And in the meeting we had in April, we found that we need to do something. And after that, we schedule a meeting every 2 weeks, only to talk about how can we help the early career researchers. And in one of these meetings, the survey was suggested and these kind of activities, but they were developed at the same time. It's not that we wait until we have the results, because we start, I think we start first the coffee breaks, and then we launch the survey. So we did everything at the same time.
Brilliant, thanks very much. We have a question from Alexandra. Do you have any idea why you had so few North American responders?
Hi, Alexandra. I don't know. Our YESS community isn't that big in North America, but the survey was open to everyone. Maybe during this month we didn't found how can we advertise it more in the region. Maybe that's one of the things that maybe we should have in mind if we develop a second one. But yeah, we were waiting more responses in Europe, because it was advertised more in that part of the world. But yeah, we try to advertise it in every region, because we have members in every region. And at the same time, for example, I'm not living in Europe, so I try to be as more international as possible.
So we have a question from Kirsten. Just before we launch into that question, perhaps Dennis could share the next Mentimeter survey, and everyone can start filling that out while we ask. So Kirsten was wondering if there was a decrease in attendance in, for example, a coffee break. So did people get tired of online meetings, or is this still going well?
No, yes, I think the first 2 or 3 weeks, they were really great, but we try to have at least one leader in each meeting to to avoid having conversations that maybe are not scientific related. But yeah, I think after a month or after a month and a half, in some meetings we have only 2 people. So yeah, people after some time, people get tired, and we stop it. I think we stopped these meetings in June at the same time as we closed the survey. But yeah, in the beginning it was really great.
Thanks very much. If anyone hasn't yet gone towards the Mentimeter survey, then if you could click the link that's in the chat box now, we have another set of questions that we'd like to just quickly run by you that are related to some of the questions that people are talking about in response to the surveys that they've said.
I think this part of the survey will take a little bit more time rather than the first one, because I tried to fill it and it took some time. So just for time, our participants, and I'll be talking about while I'm sharing. In the meantime, it's better if I share my screen together because I believe we will be moving together to the second questions as I am changing the slide. So, and thank you for joining the first poll. It was basically give us a little bit of idea like which region we mostly see our participants from, or their profession level at the moment, as well as their genders. And right now, we all know that last year put us a little bit chaotic situation with corona pandemic, and we just wanted to ask, like, what was the most challenging moment regarding your research activities? And we see that the first question says, unlocking new observational data use to cancel fieldwork and maintenance. This is a kind of middle answer, like the one I'm worrying that funding opportunities for polar research programs will be limited. And the third one goes mostly strongly agree position that the answer is, I feel that networking opportunities have decreased drastically. And the other one says, I'm not as efficient in my workflow as before COVID-19 due to the home office situation and the lack of communication with colleagues. And the last one, yeah, people say, no, I'm doing fine, thank you. Okay, thank you. And yeah. So I guess we can move on to the next one because it will also take time. Like I said, you need to feel at the moment I open this question. And this time the question, okay, we try to see the personal aspects in the first one, and the second one say, what were the overall conditions the pandemic drove? So for now, we have the answers like difficulties to maintain work-life balance or the lack of appropriate work environment at home. It takes first place. And the second says complexity. Oh, it changed. Okay. We have technical problems, including access to the scientific journals, unstable internet, and limited access to university resources, and or the robust computing resources. And as the final one, we have the complexity of sharing the same environment with the family members due to the closed schools and kindergartens. So maybe I may wait a few minutes since you are still voting. And again, I would like to just remind why we are doing this. We try to just give the idea about the previous presentations so far you listened, and it will also give you a little bit idea about the upcoming presentations. So for the final question of this poll, what was the negative impacts, if any, you had about COVID-19 pandemic? And this just brought you some aspects regarding your mental well-being. And it has to be multiple choice. So we try to see about your aspects. And as you can see, we have like grieving, trouble sleeping, as well as trouble concentrating, lack of motivation, fear others don't respect the new health guidelines, fear about getting COVID-19, fear about future of polar research, fear that health guidelines are not evidence-based, increased stress level, and increased anxiety. All right, I saw that you can only pick one. This is sad. As I am also trying to learn about the Mentimeter, hopefully next time it will be better for us to put multiple choices. Thanks for your feedback. But even though we can say that, yeah, overall, COVID-19 pandemic put people in the situation like increasing their stress levels, as far as we understand from this poll. Thank you for joining.
Thanks very much, Deniz. And thank you everybody for participating in the short survey that we're doing. I'd like now to invite Kara to start sharing her screen. So now we're being joined by Kara Nissen from the Alfred Wegener Institute. And she's going to be telling us a little bit about a survey that was conducted by the postdoc representatives at AVI. And their survey aimed at identifying the difficulties faced by postdocs at the Institute as a result of the pandemic. Over to you, Kara.
So thanks, Claire. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks, first of all, for inviting me to present our summary here. So I'm going to talk about the results of a survey that was conducted in November of last year. So we move a bit on towards kind of intermediate times of the pandemic with this third survey. And we wanted to, as Claire said, assess the impacts and the problems faced by postdocs at our institute. So I'm presenting these results here on behalf of the whole postdoc team at AVI, and I've listed the names here, and everybody has contributed their part to designing, conducting, and evaluating this survey that I'm going to present, or a short summary of today. So to start off, let me just say that we've received 65 responses to our survey in total, which represents roughly 40% of all the postdocs that we have at the Institute. So while we're certainly not capturing or representing everybody, we can clearly get a good insight into the variety of problems that were faced in that time. So to start off, nicely linking to what we've heard already before, we started off by asking them just some simple yes or no questions, whether the postdocs have experienced the cancellation of, for example, expeditions or lab work. And I want you to focus here on the absolute numbers. I'm not going to go into detail on the colors, which simply represent the different departments within the Institute. So what you can see here is that we have 1/3 of the postdocs, roughly, for both these questions that have reported a cancellation of an expedition or lab work. So you might think that, well, okay, the majority has not experienced that, so that's a good thing. But we tend to take it the other way, because of course that's a highly individual question, and it depends whether your project is dependent on an expedition or lab work. So the fact that there's 1/3, so roughly or over 20 postdocs that have reported the cancellation of an expedition or lab work, we think that's a significant negative impact, especially on these postdocs. So if we look at conference cancellations, the picture becomes way clearer. And as we've heard already, I mean, that's seems to be the case for everybody, of course. So here we found that 80% of all the respondents have experienced the cancellation of a conference between March and November of last year. So keeping that in mind, we then wanted to have a bit of a closer assessment on what the impact is on postdocs, for example, in their ability to discuss ideas with colleagues, or their ability in general to network. And here we gave the postdocs a few more answer options, ranging anywhere from stopped entirely on the left side to even improved on the right side. And we do want to acknowledge that there is some postdocs that do not find any change or even an improvement in their ability to discuss ideas or to network. But overall, so the majority, so around 70% of all postdocs who responded to our survey do feel these negative impacts of the pandemic on these two aspects of their work life. And if we then put this into a bit of a broader context, asking the postdocs whether they think that this pandemic will have or has already a negative impact on their career, we get a very interesting, a worrisome picture that overall, if we combine the two groups that answered maybe or already are clear on saying yes, we do see that 73% of all our respondents think that the pandemic might have a negative impact on their future career. So digging a bit into that, and we wanted to see if there is a difference in the answer that a postdoc would give depending on how long they've been a postdoc already. So we grouped our postdoc pool into 3 groups of academic age. So here kind of we show the oldest postdocs, those that have graduated with a PhD already before 2014. And then we have an intermediate group that graduated between 2014 and 16. And then the relatively young postdocs in terms of academic age who graduated in 2017 or later. And if we only look at the answers of those that are not worried about their future career prospects, we see a clear discrepancy between more recent graduates and more experienced postdocs. One thing I might have to note here as well is of all our 65 responders to a survey, the distribution in these 3 age groups is almost equally split. So we have, I think, a good number of people for each of these age groups. If we move on into the groups that are more worried about their future career prospects, especially if we compare the group of the people that said yes to those that said no, we almost see the perfect mirror image between the two. So overall, we do find that young postdocs are more worrisome about future career impacts. And in our survey, 87% of all the more recently graduated postdocs report really fear on their future career, whereas this percentage amounts to only 50% for the old postdoc pool. Similarly, we asked a question, just a very open one, just to evaluate the impact of the pandemic on their mental health. And here we gave the postdocs a scale from 1 to 10. But for this presentation, I grouped these answers into a low impact group, an intermediate impact group, and the high impact group. So overall, we see that 40% do report severe impacts of the pandemic on their mental health due to a variety of reasons that were listed in a text box that we offered, and only 1/3 report a low impact. And here again, if we split it as a function of their academic age, for the low impact group, we do not see any clear differences between the age group. But again, as we move into the high impact groups, we do again see a similar separation between the more recent graduates and the more experienced postdocs. And overall, we find that 52% of the young postdoc group report a high impact, whereas of all the old postdocs, this number amounts to only 29%. So just to, as this was a very short summary of our survey, so what we did find in the survey is that ABIS postdocs do report significant negative impacts of the pandemic on their work as of November 2020, with the pandemic mostly affecting their ability to conduct experiments or to go on expeditions, their ability to discuss ideas with colleagues, to share their findings and to network. And altogether, this resulted in pronounced worries regarding their future career prospects, especially amongst those who graduated more recently. We then also tried to come up with some recommendations how to maybe counteract these negative impacts. And we did state that supervisors could, for example, provide or at least encourage alternative ways to present scientific results, discuss ideas and network, especially having an eye on their younger postdocs who are, as has already been said, I think are more dependent in their early stage of the career to establish their networks. And this could happen by establishing virtual discussion groups, both internally in an institute or university and externally. And I think the fact that by now conferences are not as easily canceled, but more and more move to full virtual or hybrid formats to make them accessible even in times of a pandemic, think is a step in the right direction already. And regarding the mental health impacts that got reported by the postdocs, we encourage institutes or universities to provide guidelines or to restate the guidelines and options that exist for those who feel affected by mental health problems, for example, due to the insecurity that arises due to the corona pandemic, or for those who struggle balancing their research activities with, for example, care duties. And with that, I'm already at the end of my short summary here. And if you want more information on our survey, we're in the phase of finalizing the reports. So just get in touch with us or check out our website where you'll find it in hopefully not too long time. So thanks.
Thanks very much, Cara. If anyone has any questions for Cara, please stick them in the chat. But I just actually asked, did you have any feedback from supervisors about different ways that people could network? I'm interested because even today in our little brief survey, many people have highlighted networking as an issue. And if I think how this workshop is run right now, we're giving an online opportunity, but had we be doing this in person, we'd be having a coffee afterwards and we'd be meeting everybody who was in the session. So attendees would have a chance to follow up with questions. So online doesn't necessarily always work as well as in person might. So I'd be interested to know if there have been any good suggestions of how people can improve networking.
I mean, I feel it's a difficult one because obviously I totally agree, in-person networking is not the same as the virtual networking that we're doing here, but I do think it's the best we can do at the moment. And I think everybody should be encouraged, even if they think, oh yeah, but it's not the same, everybody should make an effort. And then this is better than nothing. It's better than sitting in your office and not talking to any other scientists at all. So I do feel like really, I mean, supervisors should really just push their young scientists to just participate in these meetings. And even another thing they could do is, for example, for the postdocs, push their postdocs to organize sessions to get in touch with other scientists, to not only participate in the conference, but organize sessions to get in touch with the people in your field. So I think as more and more conferences are moving to virtual formats, this is a great opportunity, or at least one of the few opportunities we have these days to still network to some extent.
And Kirsten is putting a little promotion for online meetings that they can be more efficient than in-person meetings. Also can be true. Unless anyone has another question for Cara at this stage, then I will invite Daniela to share her screen. So our fourth speaker today is Daniela Liggett from the University of Canterbury. So Daniela is also currently the co-chair of the Scientific Community on Antarctic Research, SCARS, Standing Committee on Humanities and Social Sciences. And she's here today to show us some of the really early results coming out of SCARS online survey that aim to understand the impacts of the pandemic on Antarctic research community. So I'll hand over to you, Daniela. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you for the kind introduction and the opportunity to talk to you all. For us, actually, down here in New Zealand, it's a relatively civilized time compared to everyone else, but it is a Sunday evening. So good evening, everyone, I should say. So I'm going to take you to the Antarctic now with a wee presentation on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Antarctic scholarly community. This is part of a quite ambitious interdisciplinary research program that was initiated by the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research in May last year, upon request from the SCAR director from the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research's director and executive committee, and especially the president there, who said, well, look, couldn't our social scientists be starting to look into how COVID-19 is impacting our community? And we then get a team of international researchers together, over 40 researchers all across the world, on all continents other than the Antarctic. And they were looking at different aspects of COVID-19 and its implications for the Antarctic community. So a team would look at, for instance, Antarctic futures, another team looked at governance issues, another one on would look at tourism issues. Then we had a team looking at wildlife and the interactions and the risks of introducing COVID-19 to the Antarctic and its potential repercussions for the Antarctic wildlife. And then there was one team that looked at specifically the impact on the Antarctic scholarly community. And that's the results that I'm going to present to you now. The key to that project was a survey, a community survey that we administered in between October and December, roughly in 2020. So rather late last year and overlapping with the Antarctic season. We had roughly 406 valid responses. For some questions, a few more. For other questions, fewer responses, because due to the sensitive nature of the survey, we actually left all questions up to the respondents to select whether they wanted to respond or not, or wanted to skip the question. So we don't really have a lot of consistency, but that at the time was the approach that also from a social psychology perspective was recommended to us, because we didn't want to stress out people even more by some of the rather tricky questions that we ask on mental health. And one of them you actually had to look at when you were selecting what kind of impacts on your mental well-being did COVID-19 have, and there should have been multiple responses possible. So that was one of the questions from our survey. And as you'll see, what you've said actually nicely mirrors a bit what we found. So overall, we had responses from over 400 people from all across the world. As you can see on this slide, most of the respondents resided in the UK, US, Australia, New Zealand, or South Korea. So a lot of them in English-speaking countries, but then we had a huge contingent, comparatively speaking, in South Korea. For most of the respondents, because many of them were active in the biogeophysical sciences, Antarctic fieldwork was either extremely important or very important. And as you can then imagine, the impact of COVID and having a postponed or delayed or cancelled Antarctic field season proved to be disastrous. We had over 40% of the respondents were early career researchers. They had identified themselves as such, and 16% overall were postgraduate students. So if we jump into some of the results, and I only have very, very few slides because I thought that was what we were supposed to be doing. So you will see quite crowded slides here, but I wanted to focus my presentation especially on the mental well-being aspects, because that surprisingly featured very, very strong results. And some of the results were surprising to us when we looked deeper at gendered responses. So here's a question that you all responded to, and that dealt with the impacts of COVID-19 on mental well-being. And as you can see here, and you pretty much only have to focus here on the extreme, the dark blue, or the orange, the significant impacts or the moderate impacts. And you can see here, just like your selections, increased stress levels were really, really high, featured really strongly generally across our respondents. There's also a huge concern about the future of Antarctic research and work. And keep in mind here that most of those respondents were field scientists, field researchers. And then other really prominent responses related to the trouble concentrating, lack of motivation. So those drivers that you were so distracted that you couldn't really focus on your work. And just here in those two boxes, generally, if you looked at what people were concerned about regarding their work, so rather than the mental well-being, we are looking here at work, then field work that was cancelled or changed in whatever way was really the top issue for people, followed by broader labeled stress that impacted all aspects of their work. And then we've already heard from Cara, and I think Valentina as well, and Kirsten that training or workshops had been postponed, and that negatively impacted especially the early career researchers who might have relied on attending certain workshops in order to develop certain lab skills and undertake their work. There's been a significant financial impact. A lot of our early career research actually had to suddenly find other jobs. And this also impacted women more so than men overall. And then distractions or inadequate workspaces for those who were in lockdown and had to work from home were also the fifth most important significant impacts. In terms of interventions, a lot of people obviously said, as we've already heard also from others, that additional funding would be really, really important, because especially for postdocs, for PhD students, or even master's research students, they suddenly were faced with a situation where they couldn't finish their degrees within the timeline that they had set aside for this activity. So suddenly they needed bridging funding because their scholarships weren't extended, or their funding from other sources had run out. International collaboration on international conferences, free access to online conferences were two other really big helpful interventions that we could offer to assist especially early career researchers. Another one was fellowships. So there was a great interest in seeing that people couldn't travel anymore, and that was another negative, that this networking and the working in other labs and internships and travel fellowships had been essentially pulled out like a rug from under their feet. And they were in desperate need to look at other opportunities of how they could connect with fellow researchers and mentors. And then finally, I did have the access to data. I can't actually see my slides because everyone's faces are in front of them. So the access to data was another one, and access to conferences. So in lieu of being able to go to the ICE or go to the field and collect your own data, early career researchers and also established career researchers said, well, what can we do to ensure that we have a better sharing of existing data in order to make not only most of the data and reduce our carbon footprint, but also ensure that our younger or early career colleagues can actually finish their work if they cannot go to the field. So those were the key helpful interventions. And now on my last slide, I'm just going to take you to a result that surprised us somewhat, and that deals with the different impacts that COVID-19 had on mental well-being for men and women. And as you can see in this table, you're seeing quite significant differences in all of the categories, especially the trouble concentrating, lack of motivation, increased stress levels, and increased anxiety. And you see here the percentage of women versus the percentage of men who responded to this survey question and selected those options, especially the trouble concentrating and the stress levels. A huge difference. And that got us thinking, well, first of all, why would there be such a difference, seeing that both parties, both men and women, were potentially locked down at home, having to look after children. And actually, as a matter of fact, the men generally said they were more adversely affected by having children around than women, which was another surprising result. And yet the stress levels for women and anxiety was much, much greater than that of men, who did generally say, oh, COVID has affected them really negatively. However, looking at the mental well-being, it was women that were much more stressed. And we looked at for other studies, and I actually came across a study in the UK that had asked similar questions and had found exactly the same huge difference between men and women. And they postulated that this was because women generally were much more socially minded and needed social connections and interactions in person with other people much more than men. So with the various levels of lockdown in the different countries, women were much more adversely affected than men. So we obviously don't really want to speculate here, but it is interesting to see that polar researchers, in this case Antarctic researchers, show similar trends as those seen in the general population. And again, the final report has been submitted to SCAR 2 weeks ago now, and will be available on the SCAR website soon. It will be presented at the delegates meeting, which is coming up this coming week, and afterwards it should be available. But if you do have any questions, feel free to email me. My email address is there as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela. So some very early results from the report that hasn't yet even been presented to SCAR. So thank you for sharing that information with us. I don't know if anyone has any questions that they would like to add into the chat. But I might ask you, Daniela, are you going to make any recommendations based on the fact, so you found that access to funding would be very, very helpful for early career researchers. Is that something that is going to be promoted throughout SCAR, and are we going to see many more opportunities for early career researchers to apply for those sorts of funding?
Well, we make a range of recommendations regarding like access to data and how that could be facilitated, mentorship, online mentorship programs, and so on that grow out of our survey results. However, we all have to be aware that SCAR is not a huge organization, and I mean, they're doing what they can within the limits of their budget. So we have to keep in mind that just asking for more funding is not necessarily realistic. However, what might be more realistic is to be aware of those setbacks that people experienced during lockdowns and during COVID in terms of publishing, and we saw similar results there to those, oh gosh, who presented those? Cara presented some, and Kirsten presented some as well. For a very small minority, they could actually be more productive, but the huge majority of respondents to our survey actually said, well, look, now we are significantly delayed, we are distracted, we can't concentrate, we are not that productive, we don't have access to labs, and so on and so forth. So we will propose that these things, those mitigating circumstances, are being taken into consideration when people apply for tenure or for jobs or for fellowships. So, and people should also be aware of the fact that the pandemic didn't affect everyone equally. So there are differences, and especially women and minorities suffered much more than established researchers. So in our survey, we had a number of established older researchers there. They weren't too bothered. Most of them, even if their field season was cancelled, they weren't too worried. But that was really on the other hand of the extreme, we saw this huge impact on early career researchers. So it was really polarizing almost, that you had those who said, well, yeah, wasn't so nice. Health-wise, they might have been more affected, but they weren't really too concerned. And then you had those really, really worried, really stressed early career researchers who said, well, I probably have to leave academia, or I have to leave polar research because I don't see a future anymore and I can't even make ends meet. So those things will have to be taken into consideration, and there will have to be a more nuanced assessment of, well, who gets what, I think, and how do we ensure that we can maintain access to online conferences for free. And that's what I really, really advocate for, because there are tendencies now that people say, well, we will have hybrid conferences in the future. It's very likely, but why not charge a small fee for anyone, even because obviously if you join online, it still has certain costs attached to it. And I said, well, actually, no, you shouldn't do that, because that would really marginalize those who do not even have that kind of money to join. You need to find a different way of charging those who can and want to pay, and making it as accessible as possible for those who just can't and will still benefit. So, I mean, we have a number of other suggestions and recommendations that we have put forward to SCAR, and we'll see to what extent they can actually be picked up.
Excellent. Yeah, well, hopefully, I think that is a really important thing, access to these for early career researchers, but also people from countries where their currency is struggles, trying to come from certain countries in the world, trying to pay in pounds, dollars, it's tricky. Yeah. Exactly. Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. Well, we'll pick up some more on those questions in our discussion session later. But right now, I'd like to invite our next speaker, Sridhar Jarok, to share his screen. Thank you, Sridhar. So Sridhar's from the Svalbard Integrated Arctic Earth Observing System. And they have also done a survey on the impact from the CEOS perspective. So I'd like to pass over now to Sridhar to introduce those to us. Thank you, Sridhar.
Thank you, Claire and Dennis, for organizing this workshop and inviting me for this interesting workshop. And being the last speaker, I had two advantages. First is that most of the speakers have covered most of the stuff, but I would specifically focus on Svalbard. And the second thing is that I could finish my first breakfast while listening to these interesting talks. So with this, I would start my talk on the Svalbard science in times of COVID pandemic and what are the impacts on the Svalbard community. But I would not focus more on the responses, but I would just a little bit focus on that aspect. So for those who do not know about the CEOS, or CEOS is the Svalbard Integrated Arctic Earth Observing System. And we are building a long-term observing system in Svalbard, which focuses on the processes and their interactions between different spheres in and around Svalbard. So the observations are both remotely sensed and in situ observations. Those are stable over time, yet dynamic as new questions from society arise. So in another way, the CEOS is also a consortium of 24 institutions from 9 countries, those having the research infrastructure in and around Svalbard. And the Knowledge Center, where I'm based in Longyearbyen, and it's a snowy morning here, around -4 degrees now. And the Knowledge Center is based in Longyearbyen, but we are working in office from home since March 2020 and still continuing now. But the Knowledge Center also handles the data management, logistical services, remote sensing services, and communication and outreach activities. So the basic product of the CEOS is it provides the annual State of Environmental Science report in Svalbard. CEOS also provides the access to the data and the research infrastructure in Svalbard. And we publish frequent calls for the access in research infrastructure and provide the training courses in remote sensing and data management. So this is what CEOS does and what CEOS is. But today's topic is the summary from the COVID-19 survey that was conducted from 8th of December to the 31st of January 2021. And most of the questions of our surveys were multiple choice questions. There were around 40 questions, which were all compulsory questions. Of course, we have provided most of the options, which if you are not able to answer, you can choose others. So we have got around 112 respondents from a diverse background and from across the globe. So why did we do this survey is to specifically understand the impacts of a pandemic on everyone who works in Svalbard, not focusing only on the scientists, or early career researchers, but also logistics operators and those who are conducting the field surveys and those who handles the logistics in Svalbard. And why this is helpful? Because we would be able to develop new services and strengthen existing services at CEOS to help scientists in 2021. And I think looking at the preliminary results, I think we have received a really good amount of suggestions to develop or strengthen our services. And of course, to develop the mitigation strategy to reduce the impact in 2021. So the first slide is that the distribution of the participants of the respondents. As you can see, that is most obvious. You can see the most of the respondents were focused on were from Europe and specifically from Norway. This is not surprising because there are more research in Europe who are focusing on Svalbard research. But also you can see that there are some respondents from India or from Russia. So we focused on the distribution of the participants based on their country of work. So here you can see the Norway is picked up again, but here if you see the number of countries represented during this survey are this is a fair amount of numbers showing the good distribution. But also you can see that as I said, that we have 24 institutions from 9 countries. You can see that most of the respondents were from the SAIS member institutions, but also we have some fair amount of numbers who are not from the SAIS members institutes, and that represents more of the international community. And this is surprising, and this is really nice to see that we have a very good distribution of gender. Around 46% of females answered to this questionnaire and around 52% of male. So this also can be seen that in the career stage of the survey, we have distributed to career stage like early career up to 7 years of experience, and the mid-career 7 to 20 years of research experience, and the senior level more than 20. But you can see that the most respondents were early career researchers. So this also provides that the survey, most of the survey respondents were from early to mid-career researchers. Then we were interested into, since SIOS is interested in long-term observing system, we were trying to find out which kind of surveys are hampered, or what kind of surveys these respondents carry out, whether they are focusing on the long-term monitoring or the irregular field work for the PhD studies, or some irregular studies there. But here you can see that most of the scientists or most of the respondents were focusing on the long-term monitoring systems or monitoring or observation in Svalbard. That's over 50% of those are conducting the long-term monitoring. So this essentially shows that the effect is higher on the long-term monitoring programs during the pandemic time. And here, this slide is very interesting because it shows that how many of the respondents canceled the complete fieldwork, or some of the fieldwork was canceled. This is important to mention here, because in Norway, on the Svalbard, the travel restrictions were changing initially very fast, like 2 weeks with the new regulations. And this is because it was difficult for most of the scientists to choose whether to go to the Svalbard, whether it was possible or not. And this is why when the Svalbard was open for the researchers, say, from June and July, for July for some of the European countries, we could see that there was a field work, which here you can see that field work with quarantine period. So essentially you have to do a quarantine in mainland Norway and before entering to Svalbard. And that enabled some of the scientists to conduct the field work even during the pandemic, but the number is around 10. And but the highest number is that canceled all field work is the highest. That means that even there was a few scientists who could do the field work with the quarantine. Some of them, they canceled all, and some field work canceled. This is also significant. But field work after the lockdown, I mean, as I mentioned, that when the Svalbard is open after July, some of the scientists, they could come to Svalbard in after July and August. So this number is also significant, around 20. So this slide shows that the changing travel restrictions changed the way scientists were thinking, and clearly the majority of the fieldwork were cancelled. But the positive thing is that it was still possible to do some science in Svalbard. So in the last slide, I would summarize that the participants were mainly from the Norway and Svalbard, with 84% participants from Europe, and 55% of participants were from SciOS member institutes. And we had a good gender balance during the survey, and good range of researchers from different career stages, which will help us to understand how each have been affected. And the research area, almost half of the participants were from the cryosphere background, with the terrestrial researchers around 36%. So, which was the second most popular. And it shows that this survey shows the impact on more of the cryosphere scientists who were focusing on cryosphere rather than the terrestrial research in Svalbard. And there were very few participants who were focusing on hydrosphere and the modeling studies. And it is not surprising, because modeling studies were not much impacted during the pandemic time, as they need the in situ data sets, continuous in situ data sets, but they could find the ways to assimilate their models. Then the Svalbard science, or half of the participants conduct long-term monitoring studies, and 1/3 of participants conduct irregular fieldwork. This shows that this survey shows the impact on long-term monitoring programs than the irregular activities in field in Svalbard. So, and the headline is not different from the others. The majority of the participants have been impacted by the pandemic, though some were not. And almost half of participants had to cancel fieldwork, although 9% of participants were able to conduct fieldwork after undergoing mandatory quarantine period, which was initially 14 days. Now it is 10 days. So with this, I would like to end my talk, but if you would like to know more about what are the responses from the SciOS on this changing situation, you can attend my second talk, which is on the room G on Thursday. And this would focus on the COVID-19 impact, and essentially this will focus on our recent publication on how did we respond to the pandemic, and which was published in February. And this I would focus more on the Earth observation, academic response on special issues, and logistics, activity, social experiences. How did we manage the whole 2020 from March to now, and what are our plans in 2021? So I would focus more on that, more on detailed response during that talk. So thank you very much for your attention, and I would be happy to attend the questions.
Thanks very much, Srinath. So if anyone has any questions, please do pop them in the chat. While you're thinking of your questions, I'd also ask Dennis to please share the final survey, the final poll, so you can start having a go at that. And Srinath, perhaps I could ask you, so clearly many people were affected by the last field season, and I'm guessing missing one field season maybe isn't the end of the world for your project. How do you know what is going to happen to your research center this coming season, and whether people will continue to be adversely affected, and do you know how that might be affecting some of the projects that are running there?
Yes, I think impacting one field season has different impacts on different projects. For instance, for a long-term observing system, if somebody is conducting 30 years of glaciological data and there is a missing data point in 1 year, it's a huge impact on the long-term series. So we don't know what's happening with the glaciers. For instance, in terrestrial research, there are people who are monitoring the vegetation and the response of different vegetations to the warming. So this also terrestrial research will be affected with the field work, which missing field data sets. But some of the data sets can be filled up with the remote sensing observations. So essentially, the different fields are affected differently based on what kind of projects and what kind of field work they carry out in Svalbard. And in 2021, we are really hopeful that we would improve on numbers of scientists who are visiting Svalbard this year. But the situation is changing rapidly. For instance, we recently started using masks in Longyearbyen, and it is since March 2020, it is the first time that, and since last month, we started using masks in the Longyearbyen, because there is a lot of travel now from the mainland and even from the outside. Because of still there is a quarantine period, but still I feel that number will improve, but I'm not sure how much the number will improve with the fieldwork activities in Svalbard this year. This is difficult because the situation is changing every 2 weeks, and there are outbreaks happening since still in mainland, mostly in Oslo. So the travel restrictions are changing faster, and that would make a really difficult choice for scientists whether to go or not to go in coming months. But I can see that most of the scientists are still in chaos, but few of them, they started thinking, and some of them are still have visited Svalbard by now, very few, but they did the mandatory quarantine in mainland Norway, and they came to Svalbard, and it was 10 days. But as you can see that the quarantine period in the quarantine hotels is expensive choice, and for researchers to use their own funds. And that is also a criteria for scientists to choose whether to go or not to go, because of the lack of funding. And looking at all these facts, I still feel that this 2021 will also be affected in some degree that we do not know at the moment.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm sure nobody thought to put quarantine hotels in their project budgets when planning fieldwork.
Yes.
And I guess it'll be interesting to see if that's something that funding agencies will cover towards the future. But anyway, yeah. So I think I'm now going to pass over to Dennis to continue with the mentoring survey. Over to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, as the final poll of our questionnaires, we wanted to ask our participants, like, everyone is less likely to see the changes in their career. Maybe again, the pandemic can change the things in another way, and we just wanted to see these results. So at that case, the questions work like this. Like, first, yeah, we wanted to see like how much you would like to, or you tend to change your job and your effort on this, and the results, like the result of your attempts. And it seems like most of the people, they're happy with their current job, but we also see a little bit of points here, like some of the people, they're still not sure about doing this, or some people they're planning to do, or as the final one, yeah, it's hard to find a new job. That's why they're just keeping the position, like maybe they're thinking also the same point. So if we move forward to the next one, yeah, it asks like which advantages you could take in the new normal of using online communication, as we also saw in the previous presentations. This can be also regarding the using online communication tools on a regular basis for the work. And our answers are like developing new skills like this, joining online workshops, or we can consider courses, learning new software maybe, or sorry, I doubled the answer there. And yeah, the second poll says that finding exciting or creative ways to socialize with friends, especially these times, it's pretty much hard to come together, but rather than, in my point of view, for example, I see online platforms are also the platforms that we can come together with our colleagues as well as family members. And the third goes to increasing online engagement with working communities, as we have like a great, let's say, the great range of the organizations and the members from all around the world, and still we have the option, like still seeking out for the options, opportunities. So in this case, we see that yes, we have at least two necessity points, like developing new skills as well as the increasing the engagement with the organizations or with the communities, and also finding an exciting way with friends to socialize close to this, and we can give the minimum range to still working for or searching for the opportunities. And as the final round of this poll, we would like to ask you and give you the floor, like, how do you feel regarding the near future in this pandemic conditions? So you can type how you feel, and we will just see some of the key points. It also can be a kind of the result of our workshop. And in the meantime, I would like to thank you for your participation as well as understanding. Like, we had the small issue with the multi-choice answers in the previous question we had. So sorry about that, but thank you for your participation. And yeah, at this point, we have really good answers and hopeful centers in this answers, and frustrating is another one following, and of course optimistic. We have to keep it obviously, and as you can see, we have other results following up. But yeah, hopeful takes the first place. Then maybe we can take home message at the end of this experiences within the whole year. So this is all from me. Thank you so much for joining to the poll.
Thank you, Dennis. We are running very, very late to continue with our discussion. So I'd just probably like to finally finish with one question that maybe we could get each of the speakers to address. Unless anybody can rush something into the chat to get ahead of me, then I'll take the question opportunity. So maybe just to each of you who's spoken, and maybe you can each go in turn in the order that you spoke, so that we don't end up talking over each other. So Kirsten, you could perhaps go first. It was clear from the theme that early career research has been really highly affected. And the two really key things are networking and fieldwork. And so I'd like each of you to maybe address whichever you feel more strongly about in terms of networking and fieldwork. What ways do you think your organization can support or can provide advice to other organizations on how to help early career researchers in addressing these two key issues?
Maybe I can start.
Okay, go ahead, Shrida.
Yes, so that's a good point. The major impacts on the conference is networking and the fieldworks. And in response to that, we started our first online conference in the month of June, which provided a platform for many early career researchers to present their studies. And in that conference, we supported 5 awards for publishing their studies free of cost. We supported the article processing charges. So this is how we responded. Also, this year in 2020, we recruited early career researcher on our working group, remote sensing working group, to provide the social experience for the person and to get the experience of working in international consortium. So in this way, we responded to our capacity, and also we started the webinar series, which also provides the social experience for the Svalbard researchers, and this would be continued this year. And the next conference is on 8th to 10th of June, which is already announced. And the fieldwork, we supported a few of the scientists with our logistics services and the airborne activities. For example, we provided the access to the airborne campaigns, like using the aircraft and the drones. So scientists do not have to visit here to do science. So some of the field work or some of the data sets can be fielded with the airborne data sets, like capturing the images using the aircraft and the drones. But of course, not all these scientists are getting benefited with this, but we try to help few of them who can get benefited with such kind of data. In fact, we supported around 14 projects, and in 2021 we are again supporting around 15 projects this year. So this is how we responded this year and last year and this year.
Thanks very much, Shrida. Over to you, maybe Kirsten.
Okay, yeah, maybe just a short answer. I think the answer is very briefly, we need to be creative in all kind of directions. So when it comes to networking, I think we've learned so much over the year now how things are working well. So we have these online meetings, and as I wrote earlier in the chat, I think some of them are really efficient. So there are ways to really connect. And also with Cara, in another project at AVI, we work together. We have never met until now in person, but it was a very nice outcome in the end. And so I think it's possible. And what I also see at the Alfred Wegener Institute in particular now in terms of field seasons and expeditions, so they have really worked out creative ways to continue. So Polarstern is right now in the Antarctic. They have put the crew, the pilots even who brought the crew and the team to the Antarctic via the plane. They have put everyone in quarantine in one hotel for 2 weeks, I think, and people had to stay there 1 week on their own in their hotel room, and the other week they could meet within the hotel. And now they are in the Antarctic. And I also know there are some aircraft campaigns going on next year and things like that. So there are ways, but one has to think out of the box, I think.
Thank you, Kirsten. Valentina, would you like to give your perspective?
Yeah, I agree with Kirsten. Yeah, I think this year for the organizations that didn't work virtually, it was like a huge challenge. And yeah, also YESS, that has been working virtually for 10 years. We also had to think out of the box because the things we usually do weren't enough because everyone was at home. So for example, one of the things that we developed last year were several webinar series with different partners. For example, between June 2020 and January 2021, we host 17 webinars on different topics to try to most of the speakers were also young scientists. So we try to give them the opportunity of have seen and being heard by people that maybe they weren't in another possibility, because some of the speakers live in, I don't know, in Argentina or Norway, and the attendees live in Indonesia or in Canada. So if it wasn't for the pandemic, that wasn't possible because all these people couldn't attend to a meeting. We host meetings personally in the past, and you have a limited amount of people that you can find to travel. And in this case, we can have meetings with more than 100 people, and everyone can learn. And it's not being in another part of the world wasn't an obstacle for these people.
Yeah, so I guess we need to embrace the opportunities that it gives us as well. Thank you, Valentina. Cara, do you have something to say from the perspective of the RV postdocs?
I mean, a lot of the things I think have been pointed out already by the other speakers. But I really think, I like what Kristen said. I mean, it's true. I've never met Kristen in person, but we've organized or participated in 2 different events now already. And also, for example, my example for the postdoc team, I've never met with the full postdoc team in person. I've actually only joined DAVI a month before, or 2 months before the pandemic started. So I think engaging in either representatives teams in your institute or in organizations like YESS, APECS, SCAR, whatever, get engaged. I mean, it's a great opportunity to network, because I mean, like was pointed out already, I mean, a lot of these organizations have worked virtually for years because these are international groups. So I mean, I agree with Kirsten. Yes, it has also advantages to work virtually, and I think we've all learned so much over the past year to how that works for us. So I think really just encouraging early career scientists, get engaged, either participate in conferences, participate in events like this, and just meet other people. So yeah.
Thanks very much, Cara. Yes, join APECS and YESS. And now, Daniela, over to you for your final words as well.
Thank you, Claire. To be honest, I don't really have that much to add to what Valentina, Claire, and Kirsten already said about online networking and the doors that it opens. I mean, that was also our reflection very strongly, not just from the survey, but also from running the project itself, this big multinational Antarctic COVID-19 research project. We did have a lot of early career researchers join it from all around the world. And it was really nice to see their enthusiasm. And they were actually telling us personally that they really enjoyed working in the group, and they finally got to meet the people who they always wanted to meet. And now they felt like they had a meaningful contribution to make, because we had all these team meetings and everyone was given a job. And we also ran I did run a bit of a session on qualitative data analysis, for instance, that people joined in and really enjoyed, I hope. So there was an opportunity to do a bit of skills-based training, as well as a lot of networking, and I think that was appreciated. And the same with the online SCAR Open Science Conference. There were actually seemingly more people participating in the conference online than there would have been in person. And we got a strong response to the ability to be there online and mix and mingle, and also be willing to ask questions to some of the really eminent researchers who you would not have asked in person. But here you could type a question into the chat box and it actually got answered. You didn't even have to put your name next to it if you didn't want to. So I think that got a lot of people out of hiding, so to say, when they wouldn't have opened their mouth, and now suddenly they have this connection if they did provide their name, and someone might have thought, this is a really good question. Can we talk about that later on? So I think it opened doors, and we just need to think about the lessons learned and the positives, and also reflect on, I think, which is really important in my eyes, reflect on our priorities in our lives. And I think a lot of people did that through the lockdowns. They actually sat back and said, well, what is really important? Is it really important that I get to go to the Antarctic, or do this or do that, or are other things in life possibly even more important that have always taken a back seat, and now we can actually devote some time to them? So that's just reframing it in a positive way.
Thank you very much. And I think we should take hope, but the key word that came out in the last question that Dennis posed was hopeful. So hopefully we can move forward. Hopefully we can move forward with that. And despite the fact that there are a lot of negative impacts that early career researchers have experienced, but there is hope that we can find ways to network and find ways to find jobs. So with that, we have slightly run over, but I'll just wrap up the session now, and just like to say a really big thank you to everyone who's attended, even though it was probably a horrible time for many of you. I'd like to say a really big thank you to our 5 speakers for their excellent presentations and for their excellent information and feedback on the experiences. I'd also like to say a big thank you to Dennis, who helped me to organize, prepare, arrange, and run the session. And a special big thank you to Carolina from APECS Canada, from APECS Portugal, who's been helping us out with the technical support for the session. Thank you very much. I'd like to encourage everybody to attend our next session, which is at 4 p.m. GMT. So you can join it the same way as you did this one by clicking through the Brella system. I look forward to being able to tell you more about all of the 3 organizations and how we use communication to work in Antarctic research. Thank you very much, everybody. Looking forward to, wish I could have a coffee with you now, but looking forward to hopefully seeing you at another session.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Claire and Dennis and everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone.